Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to our monthly SipScout party.
Thirsty Thursday.
Yes, always on Thirsty Thursdays, getting our weekend started off right. We are here tonight with Riley Duffy of Eden Specialty Ciders. We are so excited to have you here, Riley.
Hi, thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Our pleasure. And so tonight we are talking all about Eden Specialty Ciders. I have been a really big fan of Eden Ciders. Gosh, I don't even remember. I'm trying to think of where I first discovered them. You knew me. So at least 6 years I've known about Eden. Gosh, that's so interesting. Where did I first discover you guys, Riley? Maybe
Cider Festival.
Maybe at a cider festival, probably.
That would be
But yeah, and many of you know I'm born and raised in Massachusetts. So when I found that there was this Vermont cidery, I was very excited about it. And besides that connection, then I tasted their ciders and just fell in love. Like that, I have a really long cider history. I studied abroad in Spain, got to do the whole Spanish cider thing, then came back here and everything was sweet and weird and I didn't know what was going on. And so this was really, I feel like Eden was one of my very early introductions to the craft cider revolution, as I like to call it here in the States, moving away from kind of the Jolly Rancher sweet ciders that were so prevalent for a long time and moving into the more heirloom, dry, tart, feels like you're biting into an apple kind of ciders. And so I am thrilled to be sharing Eden Cider with all of you this month and getting to introduce you to Riley as well.
My background with respect to cider initially was I moonlit at an Irish pub and we served Strongbow. And that was about it.
Yeah.
And I feel like in no small part, my decision to pursue and become a certified cider professional was due to the introduction of Eden Ciders, thanks to you, little lady.
Yeah, when I first met Evan, he was all about wine, only about wine, sommelier, like really deep in the wine world for sure.
And yeah, this one in particular, the last one we'll try today was life affirming.
A revelation.
Life affirming. I'm writing that down. Okay.
Like someone because you've had ice wines plenty of times, right? And so you had a comparison point as well to what an ice cider is. Yeah.
But yeah, we're thrilled and delighted to have Riley here with us today and talk about these beautiful ciders from Eden.
Yeah. And so we're getting ahead of ourselves because we're so excited about cider.
We just start drinking cider.
We just started talking about our passion for cider. So now that we have a bunch of people here, let me just quickly reintroduce myself for those of you who haven't met us before. I am Suzanne. I'm the founder of the Crafty Cask, where we are all about celebrating and supporting craft alcohol makers like the fabulous Eden Specialty Ciders.
And my name is Evan Rothrock, certified sommelier, certified cider professional, as we alluded to there. And yeah, I guess that's enough for me.
Craft booze enthusiast and nerd. If you have any questions about any craft booze,
nerd alert.
This is your guy for sure. And Riley, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Riley Duffy. I am the National Sales Director for Eden Specialty Ciders. I'm also very involved in the production aspect. My husband is the cider maker at Eden. I've been with Eden for about 4 years. I come from the wine world. So I worked in natural wine for about a decade, and I call myself a cider defector because I really think that cider needs champions. And much like you all, Eden really changed things for me. I met the founder, Eleanor Leger. She and her husband started Eden in 2007. And Eleanor has a very interesting entree into the world and is a very big player in American cider. She's the board president of the American Cider Association, and has been really instrumental in sort of getting a lot of these interesting cider styles recognized as what they are, both in consumers and sort of anecdotal drinking culture, and also with the government. So with the TTB and recognizing ice cider as its own beverage in the United States. Ice cider is the only North American dessert cider, and it's something that we can claim. And there's very few things that we as New World livers can claim. So that's pretty exciting. But I don't want to get too ahead of myself.
Yeah,
That's
this
me.
is, yeah, and I think it sounds like we're all so passionate about this stuff that, bear with us, everyone. This is probably going to be one of those boozy rabbit holes where we tangentialize and kind of go down different paths. But for those,
circle back around though.
yeah, of course.
It'll be a spiral. Yeah.
That's right. That's right. And so for those of you who are new to us this month and who are just joining us for the first time, what we typically do is for the first half hour, 45 minutes, we kind of keep it in this format here so we can have this conversation, do the education, teach you all about this, taste through everything, and everyone can hear it all. And then as we kind of wind that down, we will promote any of you who want to be panelists as well so that you can turn on your cameras, unmute yourselves, and then we'll just kind of join in happy hour style after you've had a little bit of your drink or two and we're all loosened up and ready to just chit chat. But while we're in this webinar format, please, please, please use the webinar chat. So if you have questions about what we're talking about, if you have random questions that we're not talking about, that is totally fine. And we will make sure I'm keeping an eye on it. And so I'll make sure to get those questions in to Evan and Riley. But yeah,
and yourself.
And myself. Yes, I know a lot about cider and I'm very passionate about cider and I'm thrilled that I turned you onto it and that cider is a big part of our life. So let's crack into our first one. This is the tasting order that we're going to do here. We're going to go with deep cut first and then Troc Star, Brut Rosé, and then Tree Beer. Does that sound about right to you, the order, Riley? Yeah, great. And so I'd love to hear in the chat while we're getting started and we'll be pouring our first one here. And poor Riley, she's in a hotel right now and her cider is stuck in Wisconsin. And so she does not get to taste along with us, but luckily she's very familiar, as she has said.
I've had it once or twice. Yeah.
Great. And so I'd love to hear from all of you, kind of if you're cider curious, cider enthusiasts, if you know a lot about cider, and if you have any favorite cider brands that you know of, just to kind of orient us a little bit with what your familiarity is with cider. If you want to throw some thoughts in the webinar chat as we're getting started here. Jay's starting us off with a great first question. Why is cider not a wine? And I will add on to that for everyone. Why is cider not a wine? And when do you drink cider? Right? We all know when to drink wine. Like we drink it with food. Like, do you drink it like a wine? Does it replace wine? Is it replace beer? Is it like, where does it fit in your drinking life as well?
Yeah, that's a good addendum.
Because I feel like that's part of the challenge with cider a little bit is people, they have a steak and they go and get a red wine and they have a burger and they go and get a beer. And like, they just don't think about when to have cider.
Into that dialogue.
And so I'd love to hear about that as we talk about why is cider not a wine? Let's start there.
Well, I think that probably Riley has some strong opinions about this, given the way that she nodded there.
Yeah, go for it, Riley.
Yeah, why don't you take the lead on this one? Because I feel a certain way.
I would say this is an easy answer for me. Cider is wine. It's just made with apples. It's made the same way. I think that there are two sort of categories of cider in the market that can be a little bit confusing. There's a category that is made for easy consumption, for a low price point, and something sort of made with ingredients like concentrated apple juice, some sugar, some yeast, very much made. I don't want to say like a beer,
but to be crushable like a beer.
That's kind of a bugaboo. Yeah. But it's put together, it's made to taste the same every single time. There's a recipe that's followed. There's that. Boom. That's not what we're doing.
Yeah.
What we're doing is pressing fresh apples and fermenting them. And that's it. Just like with a wine, you would take fresh grapes, press them and ferment them. It's identical processes, really. And yeah. And also,
so I guess I would add that while saying that cider is a wine, with wine being defined as a fermented fruit beverage, there is enough examples and expressions in history and tradition of making wine from apples that it has its own name. And if there was a lot of blackberry wine that was made and multiple cultures made blackberry wine, and probably over time it would have developed its own name.
Yeah, that's fair. I think one of the things that maybe causes a little confusion is the carbonation. Honestly, I think that's where people think like this is more like a beer than a wine. simply because it's often
Sure.
carbonated. So help me understand a little bit. So it is a wine, but why is it mostly carbonated? Like versus wine is not mostly carbonated. What's that kind of piece about?
It really is, it is to sort of appease the modern palate.
Mm.
There is still cider on the market. We make a few still ciders. It's beautiful, it's lovely, it's very wine-like. I think that it's a matter of tradition of
Sure.
what's sort of happened when, post-prohibition, cider never really came back, and when it did, it came back as sort of a bubbly beverage, and that's what was recognized, and that's just sort of what's taken hold.
Yeah.
I would say it adds a lot of nuance, and often cider can be pretty acidic, so it sort of helps mitigate that.
Yeah.
But I think it's mostly just because it's always been done that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. And to that, let's do a little quick cheers, everyone, to our first deep cut we're starting out with. And I just took a sip of this and I've had it before, but man, it is it's so like earthy. There's something just so like earthy about it that I love. Like it has like a weight to it kind of, and even like the color of it. So Riley, tell us a little bit about this first expression, deep cut.
Yeah. So this is a perfect sort of analog from our wine conversation. That weight, that a lot of the aromatics are coming from tannin from the apple. Just like in wine, apples have tannin. Apples have tannin all throughout. They have it in the seeds, the flesh, and the skin, whereas wine only has tannin in the skin. So you're able to get a lot of extraction, and tannin is sort of what dries your mouth. So acid makes your mouth water, tannin sort of dries you out.
And for
And
everyone
adds
else
sort of
too,
depth and earthiness. That's what you're really tasting there. So we
yeah.
actually age some of our tannic cider, heirloom, cider specific apples. We set a little bit of the really special stuff aside for a couple of years to age on its own and really develop beautifully. And then we add a little of that tannic cider into a fresh fermented cider. So we have a fresh base of Macintosh and Empire apples, very lively acidity, really fruity, beautiful. And then we add that tannic cider, and it's almost like I liken it to adding salt to a baked good. It gives that baseline to almost taste against. So you get that earthiness, but this like bright fruit on top of it. And it's sort of because of the foil that both of those come through.
Yeah, it's really quite beautiful. And if for those of you who are taking your first sip of this and starting out with deep cut with us, if you're not super familiar with cider or you've only had kind of more of the mass made ciders, this is probably feeling pretty different. This is probably feeling a little,
Ain't no Martinelli's.
yeah, for sure. And time and place for all of those things, but like this is nuanced, and I really just love this. And you just touched on Jay's other question there, which is, wine can often be barrel aged. Do they make barrel aged cider? And the answer is absolutely, they make barrel aged ciders, and they are pretty fun barrel aged ciders. And also, this last one you'll see later is a hopped cider, right? And so then there's fruited ciders, which we'll get some examples of. So there are a lot of trends that you're seeing in beer and wine. You can find those examples in cider nowadays as well.
And I think that's one of the cool things that we are on the cusp of here in this country is developing an understanding, both in the legal sense for the federal government, but also with consumers, so that there's a clarity when you go to buy cider. Because, historically, and I think that at the outset, when we started making cider or restarted making cider here in this country, there was an effort to kind of replicate and duplicate traditional styles of cider making in France and in England and in Spain.
Yeah.
And that's just the way cider is made. And here, we're needing to figure out a way to convey that, because people that aren't from Asturias don't understand that this is an Asturian cider, and that doesn't make sense to them. So figuring out a common shared language so that it can be conveyed, and then they can pick up a can of cider and have some confidence and recognition of what they can expect to get.
I mean, even the usage of the word dry in cider is not
or wine.
is not regulated, right? And so there is a lot of confusion where makers will put dry cider on there because they know that a lot of people are now looking for dry ciders, but it's not dry, it's pretty sweet. And then you're disappointed, and then you don't know what's going on there, and you think that's what a dry cider is, and then you give up on cider altogether.
And the same thing goes with wine too. A lot of people request and believe that they like dry wine, but there's this kind of crossover where they actually want wine that doesn't have a lot of tannins or does have a lot of tannins as opposed to does have sugar residually or doesn't.
Yeah, terms are used kind of interchangeably or misused.
Yeah, they're not codified.
Yeah. Jill's asking a great question. Riley, take us into the production of cider a little bit. Help everyone understand how cider is made and how long that kind of takes.
Sure. So the short answer is it depends. Typically, a fermentation is finished. So if we're just taking a standard cider, press it, start a fermentation, it depends on if we want to use native yeast or if we want to pitch yeast. So that's our first deciding factor. So native yeast is what exists on the fruit. Yeast is everywhere in the air, on our skin, on the fruit. And if you press that fresh without washing it off, then that fruit will start to ferment once it all kind of melds together. Once it starts really like getting together. Think if you just left sort of a jar of applesauce on your counter, it would probably start to get kind of stinky.
I mean, honestly, that's partially how some of, wine cider kind of got invented originally, right?
Exactly.
A barrel of apples outside, and they're like, "What's happening out there?" And and so
I dare you to try this.
Yeah. I always joke that a native yeast, I like to think of it as terroir. Like, so we all hear about terroir, where it's like a taste of place and the soil. And I'm like, the yeast is like, it's in the air, and this is what like is going on in this place. And you can't replicate that somewhere else. Right. And so, it's really giving you more of a taste of place if you're using that native yeast.
Yes. And part of that is that it takes longer to ferment. And that longer fermentation gets a lot more aromatics out of the fermentation. So that long fermentation makes the yeast really stressed out. It makes the yeast think that it's not going to get what it needs. So it starts working really hard for its nutrition from the sugar. And that's how we get really neat, like secondary and almost tertiary notes, like this tastes like apples, but other things, is largely due to long cold fermentation. Now, we also, in some of our cans, we will pitch yeast, which is a selected white wine yeast, E40. And that kicks off the fermentation a little faster. So that we might make a better condition for the yeast to ferment happily. So that means we might temperature control the tank so it's a little warmer, so the yeast will be really cozy and get going. And that gives us a little bit more control over the length of the fermentation, how the yeast reacts. And I'm seeing this question, E40 is just the strain of the yeast. That's just its name.
And if you think of it, like when winemakers, brewers, everyone, like, I mean, there's probably like books of yeast, right? Like that you should, like, there's like a catalog. Yeah, there's like a catalog you can get that's just like and they all have different flavor profiles. They all have different, and so especially in beer, you can really choose different, I mean, I guess in anything, different yeast to be like, I want to bring out, that kind of more passion fruit, tropical flavor component. This yeast will help me do that. And so it's a science. And it is a science.
And the craziest thing is that our knowledge of this science is frankly kind of rudimentary. Like the fact that you might pitch with E40 yeast in evaluating the resulting product at the end of fermentation, what type of yeast actually completed most of it, some of it, all of it, might not be E40. Like that's plausible. That might start it, but then there's really yeast in the air that could take over if they're a more robust strain or if the conditions are appropriate.
Yeah. Okay, so we choose our yeast, whether it's native or...
So Typically with a native yeast, it's done when it's done. 4 weeks to 12 weeks. With a pitched yeast, which is what we were just talking about, it's about 2 weeks, 5 days to 2 weeks.
Okay.
And that's when it's too dry. We ferment most of our ciders to dry, with obviously the exception of the ice ciders. And when they are not fermented to dry, they're typically cold crashed before all of the yeast has died. So we kill the yeast by dropping the temperature so the yeast can't survive that way.
One of the things that you mentioned earlier with respect to, native yeast fermentation that I think is maybe helpful in illuminating to some, with respect to the aromatics that you were describing, that allows. My understanding with respect to this is that when you have a commercial strain of yeast like E40 or any others, but there are some that are intentionally designed for, like, perchance a champagne site or a champagne yeast that is intentionally designed. It is cultivated to ferment hot and fast. And the speed at which you ferment generally is based on the heat and the temperature at which you ferment, because one of the byproducts of fermentation is heat, and then it compounds that. So the fermentation goes faster and faster and faster. And what that does is it kind of cooks out some of those more delicate, nuanced aromas. So like fermenting slow and cold keeps and retains a lot of those.
We have another question from Susan. The difference between cider and Calvados.
Do you want to go?
Sure.
Yeah.
Cider is to Calvados as wine is to brandy.
Elaborate.
It's the distillate that is made from, you ferment apples into cider, and then you distill it, and then specifically, then it's apple brandy. But if it's made in the Calvados region of France, then it can be called Calvados. Same way you can ferment grapes into wine and then distill it and make brandy, regular brandy, or if you do it in cognac or Armagnac, you can then call it Armagnac.
I guess it's also the way beer is to whiskey, right? You take grains and you ferment them, and then you distill beer and make that whiskey.
Yep.
So, yeah, great question. What makes apples not good for cider? Interesting question. I might throw up this. I have a visual here, Riley. You guys can start answering this, but I have a visual that we've created a while ago of the 4 quadrants of like different.
One of the ways that we've tried to understand being able to talk about cider in a way that can be codified and understood.
No, I don't know about all that, but yeah. But so let's talk about the apple. Well, actually, let's jump into our second cider first, because I want to make sure we keep tasting along here. Here, let's pour these together in one glass so we can keep sipping on that.
So I love this question. It's excellent. I would say any apple is qualified for cider. A lot of eating apples, a lot of grocery store apples are mostly bred for water content. The modern palate really just wants a snap when you bite into the apple. And so it's selected for what we like to eat. So that's sort of what we commonly think of as an apple. There are so many apple varieties. Apples are more chromosomally diverse than human beings.
Isn't that crazy?
There's like 8,000 on the planet or something like that.
Yes, at least.
Yeah.
If an apple falls from a tree and that apple goes to seed, the tree that grows and the fruit that's produced will not be identical. It'll be a descendant of that apple. So that's just sort of an aside. That's just sort of a fun fact. But what makes apples really good for cider is what makes grapes really good for wine: acid and tannin. So sugar and tannin. You want really ripe, beautiful fruit. So good quality fruit is, raw material makes for a really great cider at the back end. But concentration of those flavors is really important. So a lot of the apples, and this is a great visual, thank you so much. Like the bitter sharps and the bitter sweets, they typically don't taste very good to eat. It could be like biting into a cotton ball, that those flavors and those tannins or acid is so concentrated, that it really needs the length and the scientific aspect, the chemistry of fermentation to bring out what its destiny is for. So there's a history, in colonial apple history, that is sort of like Evan was saying, descendant from English and French cider apples. Those are definitely more bred for fermentation. So they will be really nuanced when you ferment them, and they store pretty well. So that's another aspect, is that if they have good structure, they tend to ferment well and they can ripen really well. And so the opposite of that is a lot of water. So structure of membrane versus structure that sort of holds a lot of water, that's gonna be a sort of lighter, less flavorful fermentation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And
Something that's kind of fun for all of you to imagine, if you've ever eaten a crab apple off of a tree, something that isn't
you
cultivated,
probably haven't done it twice.
something that's cultivated for eating, when those apples are ripe, they have the same sugar content as a Gala apple or a Fiji apple. The thing is that those crab apples just have a lot of acid and a lot of tannins that kind of mask the sweetness that might otherwise be there. So fun thing to keep in mind next time you have a crab apple.
Mhm.
Yeah, and it really, I feel like most apples that make great cider are not apples you want to eat.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of the way it goes. And so when you're thinking of apples and you're thinking of, the apples you have in the grocery store, that is not primarily what, and that's part of, and I know this is hotly debated, but that's partly what, kind of stifled the cider industry in our country for a very long time with prohibition, right? I mean, and I know this is a little hotly debated that like, is this really the reason? But what I've heard, and we can all debate this a little bit, is, because the apples that are good for making cider really aren't good for a lot else. Like even if you bake them, even if you you can't make them into a good pie. You can't make that. So when prohibition hit and like you had all these apple trees that they were making cider with, because we've been making cider in this country forever. Like it was one of the earliest,
Oh yeah, it's what the founding fathers were drinking.
Absolutely.
Oh,
and it was partially because it was safer than water, and so it might have only been 1 to 3% alcohol, but it was still cider.
Mhm.
And so when prohibition hit and like you have all these apple trees and you can't make any money off of them anymore because you can't make cider anymore, a lot of those heirloom varieties and varieties that are great for cider but nothing else kind of went fallow. No one was taking care of them anymore. They got ripped up to replant other things, right? They needed to use their farm for something productive. And so then when prohibition ended, cider kind of just didn't come back for a while. And when it did start to, a lot of the apple trees that were still around in our country were not necessarily the apples that you want to make cider with. And so some of that early cider was very sweet and, made for the American palate in a different way. And now there's a lot of cider makers who are really investing a lot of time and energy into replanting these heirloom varieties, finding these heirloom varieties and bringing that culture back, which is why we're getting such great cider now.
Yes, and thank you, Suzanne, for naming it. The sort of name that we use for cider-specific apples is heirloom apples. That's pretty industry standard.
Yeah. Tom, the apples that might be good in your pie are probably going to make a better cider than Red Delicious.
Yeah. There's an apple that grows, it's native to New York State, that's called Northern Spy. And it is arguably the best apple for pies. The saying is spies for pies. It also makes an incredible single variety cider. I think also something to note about what makes apples good for cider is that because they're so diverse, it's common that we'll blend different varieties of apples to really get the palate that we're trying to achieve. I like to say apples like their friends. There's very few apple varieties that have the right balance of acid, tannin, and sweetness to ferment nicely in a palatable way. But if you are deliberate about how these flavors differ and complement each other, and usually it's kind of a one-to-one, if the flavors and the mouthfeel kind of complement each other when they're raw, they'll continue to do that when they ferment as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing I think about cider, and a kind of a contrast to what you see in wine, where there's numerous and arguably like most wine that you find in the world is varietal. Like that is what the expression is an expression of that single type of grape. Maybe there's 2 or 3% of this or that, but comparatively, it's highly uncommon, with the exception of maybe a handful of apple varietals that you see varietal cider. Northern Spy being one of them. I feel like I've seen a dab in it.
Kingston Black.
Kingston Black.
Kingston Black's lovely. Golden Russet is lovely. Yeah.
Overall, would you say like half a
Gravenstein and
dozen?
Sonoma. Gravenstein is a big one in Sonoma.
And Jonathan. Yeah.
Hey, Riley, can you tell us about this Troc Star? Because I got to tell you, like putting my nose in it.
Love to.
I was immediately, and I know what's going on here, but still, I was like, oh, this smells like an aged Riesling. Like this is, it really has that beautiful smell to it. And the color is just gorgeous. And it's very different than our first one. So tell us a little bit about what's going on here.
Yeah, so the Troc Star is a cider that is fermented on pressed Riesling grape skins. Yeah. So Eden Ciders just this past year, 2023, merged with a Vermont winery. It's called Shelburne Vineyards. They are a very, pioneer in cold climate winemaking. And as we sort of addressed right at the outset, cider and wine they just go hand in hand with the process. And we find that regionally, cold climate wines and ciders really play nicely together. But this specific cider was sort of just a fun whim. Why not? So we have this cold climate Riesling. It's the only Riesling planting in Vermont. Our friends took the grapes, pressed it, made a beautiful Riesling wine, and then they gave us their skins. It was pretty much they would have thrown it away. They would have composted it. So we took those skins and we threw them it's not like very glamorous. We dumped them in a tank of fermenting cider. It was just starting to ferment, so it wasn't anywhere near dry. So those skins got to play along in the fermentation and sort of inform. Some of those Riesling yeasts were in there. It added a little bit more structure to the fermentation because of the tannin in those skins. And we did cold crash this one. So this has a little bit of residual sweetness, and that is from arrested fermentation. So we stopped the fermentation at about, I think it's about 10 grams per liter of residual sugar. And the name is Troc Star because Riesling is categorized as Trocken through Cabinet. So Trocken is on the dry side, through Cabinet, which is sweet. And we kind of wanted this to be a fun, like kind of whimsical cider. So we took a little bit of the tradition and a little bit of just like playful name. So cool. Troc Star.
Lovely. It's really, I love the color and the aroma and the flavor. It's really, I like that a lot.
So the number that you just mentioned with regard to the sweetness of this, I feel like it helps people orient themselves. A gram is roughly 1 packet of sugar that you might have on the table at your cafe. So if you can imagine 10 of those packets in a liter, human perception is roughly around 3 or 4 grams per liter, less than that, or right around that. You're probably not going to recognize that there's any residual sugar.
Under 3 or 4?
Under 3 or 4, depending on.
In a liter, okay.
Yeah, depending, yeah. And then if you have a can of Coca-Cola in your refrigerator right now, I think that's 40 grams in a 12-ounce can, which roughly translates to about 90 grams per liter. So this is slightly sweet. And keep in mind that, of course, there's a bunch of acidity in a Coca-Cola.
Because if you missed it before, this is 10 grams per liter is where this kind of nets out at the end.
So it might sound like there's a lot of sugar in there, but
it's very low. Yeah.
And it's important to note that it's not white sugar, it's naturally occurring apple sugars.
Right.
Yeah. Although, you know, some producers do use cane sugar to ferment. We don't have to, because when you press the apples super fresh at harvest like we do, they have lots of fermentable sugar still in them. So we don't need to add.
Jay, I love this question. Where is the future of ciders going, and should it?
And we missed his previous question too.
Oh yeah, Johnny Appleseed. Oh yeah, planting trees in hopes that it would turn into booze.
Was Johnny Appleseed?
I don't know the full story about Johnny Appleseed.
In hopes that it will turn into booze. You know, my recollection, and Riley, if you want to chime in, my understanding is that was an actual person.
Yeah, I think
John, I think his name was Carpenter.
I think so.
Or something like that. I think it started
that.
with a C. But I don't feel like I really have any recollection of his mission or reason of why he was planting trees. And if in fact he did go around planting a lot of apple seeds.
I think that is a true story. And I think it was something related though to like trying to like attract other people to build towns in those areas, because apples were such a big part of the culture then, and you could make safer water sources out of it, and you could eat them, and so
you could ferment them.
And so his thought was, as I'm roaming and traveling, if there's apple orchards that come up, as new people come by, they will be more likely to settle here because it's already kind of gotten started, is what I believe part of the story was. But someone can fact check that and probably tell us we're way off and have no idea what we're talking about here. The future of ciders is a very interesting question, because I do feel like there is a lot of stuff that's hotly debated. I'll throw one thing out there just to get us kicked off here. I think I've heard a lot of talk over the years about how cider is moving too quickly on the heels of craft beer. So kind of looking at the craft beer industry and market, and seeing how the craft beer industry has gotten like crazy with the fruited and the sours and the barrel aging and like all of these really creative, the milkshake IPA, right? All of these really creative, crazy expressions. And that cider kind of started getting really popular as that was going on, and like moved into that kind of stuff a little too quickly, just because they were kind of like, well, craft beer is doing it and people love it in craft beer. And the criticism is that craft beer had decades almost of, this is what a lager is, and this is what a pilsner is, and this is what an IPA is, without all the bells and whistles kind of confusing everyone. And that maybe we're moving a little too fast into fruited ciders and barrel-aged ciders and all that, because people don't even know what a dry cider or a Spanish style cider is yet.
We need baby steps.
And so that's my thing to throw out into this conversation. But I would, so I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on that, but also just future of cider. Where's it going and what do we think?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I feel right now, today, feel pretty uniquely qualified to answer that. I am coming to you live from CiderCon 2024.
That's happening right now.
Which is the largest cider symposium nationally, I think maybe globally.
It's so fun to go to.
It's super fun.
Actually, Stephen, I realized CiderCon was going on right now, but I did not connect the two, that you were there. And so thank you for taking time away from all of the festivities to do this with us. That's incredible.
I knew that I was going to be really wanting to share with, like, I get excited.
Excellent.
But I would say you both made really excellent points. And I would say I agree with you on a personal level. I think that it is difficult to have an industry standard of what quote unquote real cider is, to have just a basic understanding like we do with beer and wine. Someone made a point to me today that I thought was fascinating, that a lot of people will try one cider and it will be very sweet or very tart. It's not what they want. and they don't like cider.
This is it. Yeah.
That doesn't really happen with beer or wine. You don't try one beer and you don't like it, so you never try any other styles of beer. Or you don't like a Chardonnay, so you're never going to drink a Cabernet Sauvignon. Like that doesn't happen. So why is it happening with cider? Maybe it's because it was too flooded and everyone has their own definition. Is that terrible? No. Is it a barrier to progress? Probably yes.
Yeah. It's a big consumer education challenge of like really helping people, and hopefully all of you feel like this is helping you with that challenge, like helping you taste through and understand step by step a little bit some of the varieties and the differences and what's going on in this industry.
Yeah, going back to the very beginning of this evening, the idea that cider is wine, and just because you don't like Chardonnay doesn't mean you don't like wine.
Yeah.
And just because you don't like this cider doesn't mean you don't like cider. It's easily as broad and diverse, and arguably more so because of the general, like, whether it be good or bad, the decision to, as an industry with the cider world, hop cider and add additional fruit to the cider. Usually wine is made from grapes.
Yeah.
And it's either aged or not aged, but you don't see a lot of wine that's hopped. Like I've never actually seen a wine that's hopped. And so just because you don't like this one doesn't mean you don't like cider.
It just means you got to keep drinking and keep trying more, guys. I hate to break it to you.
Don't write it off. Yeah.
Persist.
Drink through it. Drink through it. Yeah.
Persevere. You'll find the cider or the wine or whatever that you love. Let's move on to the Brut Rosé. And then great question from Bob and Kristen here. So back in my youth, a buddy rehabbed a cider press. We gathered a pile of apples and cranked them through the press. The product was delicious. Then it got nice and tangy, but all too quickly turned sour. How could we have turned it into cider?
You very well may have.
I think you probably did. I think that sometimes, it sounds like the issue there was volatile acidity. So that is something that happens when, again, the yeast is stressed, when it's not ideal fermentation conditions. Also, it sort of depends on the environment it's fermented in. If it's not very sterile, I always say that cider making is 90% cleaning. Winemaking is 90% cleaning. Kind of obsessively, there's a lot that can fall out of balance, and a lot of kind of we just kind of use the term flaw broadly. Flaws can come out.
Yeah.
And very well, like also that could have been fresh non-alcoholic cider, and then it could have become hard cider, and then just a little bit of an acetobacter, and it could have turned the alcohol into vinegar. That could have happened very easily as well.
Yeah. Tell us about this Brut Rosé.
Brut Rosé is a cider infused with red currant. So this particular product was made for my boss because where we live in the Northeast Kingdom of Vermont, we're on the Canadian border. We have probably 6 to 8 months of just gray sadness. And in the spring, we have between winter and spring, we have mud season. So the roads wash out, you can't get anywhere, it's ugly. And Eleanor, our boss, said, I want to feel like I'm in the south of France. I want to drink something that will make me feel like I'm sitting on the French Riviera. And this is sort of what came about. Very Provençal rosé. It's kind of a unique thing for us. Typically, we let the apples sort of do their thing, and the cider is what it's going to be. This is one where we kind of want it to make a beverage. We want it to be this. So we sourced currants our currants actually come from Germany. That's where red currants grow in abundance, and they're able to export. really hard to source them domestically. But so basically we ferment the cider, we add a little bit of ice cider back in. So we blend that and a little bit of red currant, which has lots of earthy tannin and spice, sort of that like great cranberry baking spice note almost. And it's just like supremely fruity and crushable and wonderful.
It really, and the nose on this, I just want to hang out with my nose in the glass.
Strawberry jam. Oh, yeah.
So nice. What does a currant taste like? It's been a long time since I've had is it kind of like a dried cranberry? Is
Real
it
intense cranberry. So it's like a smaller cranberry. The berry itself is probably about a, third to half a size of a cranberry. So it's just more ratio of skin to flesh. So it's like more mouth drying, more tart.
But they're also sweeter than cranberries, right?
A little
Maybe
bit.
not too much. Yeah.
A little bit.
Mhm.
I feel like they're not really cultivated and they don't grow indigenous to the United States. Like you
And
don't.
black currants are invasive, so they're prohibited from growing. So I think folks just think currant bad.
Mhm.
Red currants are not invasive, but
Interesting.
Interesting. I didn't realize that they were invasive.
Why don't we talk about the tree beard as well? Because I feel like we have a chatty audience tonight, and so we might
Yeah,
as
there's some
well
questions and
get
we can
to well,
jump in here and
but we
open
can
this
go
up once we're done getting through these
delicious
ciders.
deliciousness. Yeah.
awesome. So tree beard is going to be, do you want me to jump in? Go for it.
Yes, please.
Tree beard is going to be another totally bone dry cider, just like the deep cut that you had first. So it's going to be a little bit more wine-like in its base and a little less fruit forward. And then we put fresh hops in this. So fresh hops is a term that's like not really the official term. In beer, you either dry hop or wet hop. So it's seasonal. A wet hop is when hops are in season and you throw the whole sort of bud of the hop in the beer to steep. And then pretty much for the rest of the year, not in fall, you would dry a hop, put it into a pellet and throw that, and then that's dry hopping, or dry the hops themselves, whatever. So we fresh hop, which is closest to wet hopping. But we kind of coined this term fresh hopped because we drive to the hop farm the day these bad boys are picked. Pick them up, we drive back to the cidery. It's like 6 hours round trip, but it's really important that they go in the day that they're picked. And we steep it really, really gently. So we want a delicate extraction. The way I like to put it is we're going for verdant, not resin. So we want something really bright and green and herbal. And we don't want something that's like we don't want the bitterness. We don't want to over extract and get to like IPA territory. This one to me, close your eyes and it's like a Sauvignon Blanc. It is such a fun cider. I don't love hopped cider in general. I was a little reluctant to making this, but we found a really great hop partner. They're organically grown. They're beautiful. The hop varieties, if anyone's a beer nerd, are Cascade, Willamette, and Centennial. So all Vermont grown. We steep them for about 2 weeks and then it's pressed off very, very gently. So we don't want to over extract the rhizomes. We use a tincture press, which is a teensy tiny. It's about the size of a 5-gallon bucket press. It's laborious. It takes forever, but that's the only way we can get that delicate extraction. So that's how we do that.
It's really lovely. I feel like the first hop cider I ever had, I totally fell in love with. It was just a beautifully, and I'm forgetting who it was right at the moment. And then, so I thought like, oh, I love hop ciders. And I really started trying a bunch of them. And man, there are a lot of bad hop ciders out there, like a lot that honestly to me just end up tasting like an armpit, kind of like they just go like over the top with like
And, like, what are you trying to cover up with this hop flavor?
Yeah, well, and I think like apple combined with that like really like hoppy like can just get a little weird sometimes.
Yeah, when you've got the roasted malt sweetness density in a beer, you can have a lot more hop character.
Yeah.
But the delicacy of a lot of ciders don't necessarily stand up to it unless you do delicacy.
And this is nuance. It's beautiful.
Yeah,
And when you
it's
said
so
Sauvignon
good.
Blanc, I can definitely see that. Like, I don't know that I would have got there myself, but it has that like fresh vibrancy.
A New Zealand Sauv Blanc. We're not talking
Sure.
Gooseberry,
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really
tomato leaf.
just,
Uh-huh.
yeah, all of these, Riley, are, I mean, I knew I loved Eden Ciders, but it's always so fun to taste through them like focused like this and really, really go through them.
Thanks.
Let's move on to the piece de resistance.
Yeah, time for the big show. Cool.
So
So ice ciders. Tell
you
us.
guys haven't opened this yet. You're in for a treat.
Yeah.
Yes, you are. So ice cider is where Eden Ciders got its start.
Yeah.
Back in 07. It was born out of a weekend trip to Montreal. So ice cider is native or was developed in Quebec. So in the tradition of the German ice vine, where grapes freeze on the vine and then they're pressed and the sugars are concentrated then, there was a really kooky guy in Quebec in the 1970s that started playing with that same methodology at his home orchard and in his own basement. And finally, around the late 80s, early 90s, he started really producing ice cider. And it was recognized by the SAQ, the Canadian, alcohol governance, as its own product. Fast forward 15 years, Eleanor, my boss, the founder of Eden, travels to Montreal for a weekend with her husband after they had left her career in Wall Street. She had a first career in Wall Street. They bought an abandoned dairy farm and we're just going to move rurally. They went up to Montreal. They tried ice cider for the first time and their worlds changed on a dime. They were like, what is this? We have to make this.
You
It's
said
so
like
terroir based.
Yeah.
And it is it's dessert wine. So basically ice cider, the ice portion comes in from freezing prior to fermentation. So the process of making ice cider can be done two ways and still be classified as an ice cider. So you can allow the apples to freeze on the trees. So after the first frost of the year, which, happens usually after harvest is well over, you can let those freeze on the trees and press those frozen apples. They have a special name. They're called griggles when they freeze on the trees.
Griggles.
Cute. And then you take that juice that's going to be very concentrated because they were frozen and sort of the water is sapped in that process. And you're going to have a really concentrated raw cider that when you ferment, you'll be able to ferment to higher alcohol because you'll have more sugar to start. And basically your guide to fermentation is yeast eats sugar and expels alcohol, produces alcohol. And so when you have all this extra sugar, you can ferment extra high. This is about 11% alcohol and still maintain all of this residual sweetness. So the raw material that you get is only about 10% of the volume of the fresh pressed cider as it happens.
Wow.
And the way that that's extracted is either through freezing on the trees, or what we do is we press our apples fresh, peak ripeness when they have all the fermentable sugars available. And then we stick the liquid in totes outside, big, I wish I had a picture, I should have thought of that. A big stack of plastic totes of apple juice. And in the winter, they freeze solid. And then in the spring, as things thaw, that frozen solution starts to thaw based on density. So the apple solution, the sugars are more dense than water. So they will fall to the bottom of that vessel. Think like when you melt a popsicle, when you melt a freeze pop, you'll get the sugary stuff melts first because it has a higher melt point, higher melt point. I always get it backwards. So you'll get the concentrate will melt first and leave behind an ice cap. So we're able just to capture that very concentrated first melt, which is pretty much all liquid apple sugar. And that's what we do to ferment the ice cider. So this particular cider is about 18 different varieties of heirloom apples, all grown specific for cider production. So those ones that wouldn't necessarily taste great to eat, but they ferment really long, slow, and cold beautifully. And yeah, you can see outside of our red barn, that's the scene of the winter there. So yeah, that's basically how it goes. The ice cider is fermented to about 10%. We stop the fermentation by cold crashing again to kill the yeast. And then really importantly, we age the ice cider for at least 1 year, but closer to 3 years in tank prior to release, because part of that intensity of sugar in the concentrate is that all the flavors are very intense. And we really want it to sort of round out and get silky and a tiny bit oxidized, interact with oxygen a tiny bit, so that it gets this beautiful, silky, almost like tropical fruit, pineapple pie, pineapple upside down cake thing. So that's what we're going for there.
Are these the tanks, Riley?
Those are them. Thank you for finding it. That is ice cider resting for the winter.
Cool. So they just sit outside getting chilly and cold all winter long in Vermont, huh?
They
And
sure do. Yep.
such a cool process.
Yeah, just to clarify a little bit of the process itself, effectually, what you were describing is that the less dense sugar and constituents of the cider that are not water melt first.
Yes.
And then the water that is still frozen, you remove, and by doing so, concentrate it. So you don't let the water continue to melt and mix with those constituent parts.
Correct.
You take the water out in its ice form.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So let's
8 pounds.
8 pounds. 8 pounds. Off by 1, Ed. So close. So we'll keep answering these questions. We'll get to the UV effect, but I'm going to, just so everyone knows, I'm going to basically promote everyone to panelist. You can turn it down and still stay off camera and keep listening in if you would like to, or you can accept it, and then that will allow you to turn your camera on and unmute yourself and just join in on the party a little bit. And before I do that, I do want to remind everyone, if you, in your SipScout kit, at the bottom of your SipScout report, our friends at Press Then Press did offer up a promo code to get 10% off for anything you order on their site, or free shipping if you use the promo code CraftyCask12 for 12 or more bottles or cans. So
being able to mix
discount,
and match.
yeah, being able to mix and match, and Press Then Press
is a pretty cool thing.
has a great craft cider selection. So not only can you stock up on some Eden cider, and they have other varieties of Eden cider and their ice cider too, because Eden, you make a few different varieties of ice cider.
Mm-hmm. We
That's
do.
right.
And I also need you to tell everyone about Orleans, because that is like one of my all-time mind-blowing favorite things in the whole world.
Yeah.
But so everyone, when you get your promote to panelist, either accept it and join us for the party, or don't. If any of you have to leave and you don't want to stay for the happy hour, cheers. And thank you for joining us, but hopefully you will all stay and keep drinking this delicious cider with us. And I'll put those promo codes in here as well once we get rocking and rolling here, so that if you didn't get the kit, you can still get a nice discount on Eden Ciders.
So, Riley, I know the Orleans has been around for a little while. What was the inspiration?
Yeah, tell us about what Orleans
I'm sorry,
is.
I'm getting ahead of myself. Would you mind telling us what that is and how on the planet you came up with these ideas?
Yeah. So our Orleans line is a line of cider aperitifs. So it happened as a lot of things happen, like we were talking about just making wine in the first place. by accident. So the Orleans base is a second freeze of ice cider. So basically, it's a byproduct of the ice cider process in that we pulled off the concentrate of the ice cider that we wanted to put into those bottles. Then we let the solution refreeze altogether. We didn't pull the ice cap out. That was the problem. So it all refroze together. And then it sort of reconcentrated itself a tiny bit. It sort of does the process again, but it's a not as concentrated melt the second time. So that freezing process will clarify it every time, just a little bit lower yield each time. And part of that was that there was less sugar to start, so it was able to ferment all the way to dry. So it was able to ferment to about 16% alcohol, whereas if it had had all of that intensity, it would have killed the yeast would have died from the alcohol. So it just was this sort of what happened? What do we do? It tastes very savory. It's very intense. It's way too high in alcohol to really call it cider. And so we collaborated with another Vermont producer who is actually a very well-renowned wine maker in Vermont. Her name's Deirdre Heeken. She produces La Garagista wines. She's, you may have seen her in New York Times, wine enthusiast. She's very prolific wine producer, but her background is in Italian wine and vermouth and amaro. So she was able to source botanicals and aromatics all locally to the Northeast Kingdom, to Vermont. And she made these beautiful recipes to use with our base cider, or base aperitif. I misspoke, sorry.
What a happy mistake.
Yeah. And you guys,
there's
seriously,
lots of those. Yeah.
this Orleans cider aperitif is.
Yeah, if you have any affinity towards vermouth.
It drinks like
or frankly, like.
It is so good.
Madeira, sherry. If you like anything like that, this is very.
We have to get more. Why do we not have some in our fridge at all times?
It's so.
Yeah, we don't have some in our fridge at all times because we go through it too quickly.
Yeah, hard to keep around.
So good. Welcome everyone. Nice to see your faces and your names and all that good stuff. So feel free to unmute yourselves and just jump on into the conversation here. Jay, I know Jay had a question about UV. Does UV play a role in when the juice is sitting outside and
the degradation of the juice from UV? But it looks like those are pretty well shielded.
They are. Also, at the time that we are making and melting the cider, we're not getting a ton of sunlight in a day.
Like 4 hours.
There's no sun. Winter in Vermont.
So there's that. But I will say that the difference in heat fluctuation in the melting process is something very beneficial, sort of like a diurnal swing in wine. Nights are cold, days are warm. It makes for really beautiful texture in the beverage. Sure. So those elements are actually in our favor.
Is there something that, like, if it were possible to get it to be frozen solidly enough that you could, do that whole process in a climate or a region where you would have even more significant of temperature swing? Like if it would go from like 0 to 70 and back and forth, I know that's dramatic, like a 70-degree temperature swing. But do you feel like that would even encourage a greater level of like depth of character?
I would imagine, yeah. I think that sounds like you all need to make some ice cider in the high desert. I think that's the only time, that's like the only place you're going to get that, right?
Love it.
Yeah, 70 degrees is maybe a stretch, but 50 degrees?
Hi, Ed.
Hey there.
How you doing?
Hi, Bob and Kristen.
You're familiar.
Hi,
You're familiar with Eden Ciders, right, Ed? You
Yeah,
can.
I consider Eleanor a friend. So
Oh,
she's the one that gave me
wonderful.
the 7 pound number a long time ago. So
Oh.
I think it's Apple inflation is what happened. I think it's 8 pounds now.
Yeah, I
Uh,
think she's like, I have to up my game here a little bit. I'm gonna go 8 pounds this pitch.
so
Yeah.
and
More gravitas.
the ice ciders will age really well. I didn't have time to do shopping before this, so I pulled from my cellar a 2013 heirloom blend. And
Fun.
Look at
oh
that
man,
color.
it's so good. It's
Yeah.
so good.
Yeah, look at the color on that.
Yeah, look
Yeah,
at
look
that.
at
This.
it's so
Look,
yeah.
that's wild.
I
Uh-huh.
did when I saw that's why I messaged you guys. I said, "Are you drinking heirloom blends? If not, I was going to go rummage around to find whatever it
11
was you were
years.
drinking." But
Huh.
I
yeah,
wonder,
this is a
Ed, do you have the barrel age? No, it's not
No,
even.
no, I do have the barrel age, but I
But
just grabbed
that's
the
not it,
regular one
right?
too.
So that's
So
just oxidation. Yeah, they age
yeah,
beautifully on the shelf.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
fun.
Mhm.
That's great. We're gonna try to be quiet for a minute because we'll just keep talking, you guys. So if you guys have questions or thoughts,
Favorites, thoughts? What'd you guys appreciate? Like,
Tom and Steph, are you guys big cider drinkers? Yeah, you guys like cider? Uh-oh, we can't hear you. I see you're talking and you're not muted, but we can't hear you. We'll work it out. We'll work it out.
Right. Is that better?
Yeah.
that's better. Yeah.
Okay. I like dry ciders, so these are perfect. I'm not a big fan of sweet ciders.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a winery outside of Santa Fe that has nice dry ciders that we always buy bottles every time we're there. Black Mesa.
Oh, you have to let us know what that is. I'm not sure.
yeah, do you know the name offhand?
It's Black Mesa.
Oh, Black Mesa. Oh, you just said that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Cool.
I love Santa Fe.
What's the cider house that's near Tom and Steph that we also love?
Bishop Arts or East Ciders are the two big Dallas ones.
Where are you thinking?
No, I'm sorry. I'm thinking like the Carolinas. I forgot you guys are in Texas.
Oh, Botanist and Barrel.
Oh, they're so great. I saw them last night.
Oh,
great.
good. Tell them we said hi. We love Botanist and Barrel. Yeah, they're out down in North Carolina. They're actually down near Larissa.
Sorry, Tom and Steph, I misplaced it.
Yeah, so Larissa, you're kind of near Botanist and Barrel. You should check them out. But they do a lot of really fun kind of native fermentation, fun things with fruits. Like they do a lot of fun stuff too, for sure. Yeah.
That's a good
Oh,
question.
is there a
Jay.
particular glass that's unique for cider?
I'm not familiar with this.
Yeah, Riley, what do you think? What glassware do you drink
Does
your cider
Beetle
out of?
make a cider glass yet?
Not really. I think that there's two camps of pint glass or wine glass. I stand firmly in the all-purpose wine glass camp for cider.
Yeah, me too.
Sometimes ice cider, it's nice out of a cordial glass just because it's meant for a small pour. But for me, I actually like my ice cider in an all-purpose glass for aromatics. That's just me.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
It's funny you would say that because I had grabbed my I usually have like a little nonic pint that I use for cider, but it's a smaller one. It's only 12 ounces.
Yeah.
And then when I saw Suzanne and Evan with their glasses, I quickly got up and went and got my wine glass.
Power of suggestion.
I got peer pressured into changing my glassware.
Yeah, I usually use a tall tulip when I'm drinking cider.
Yeah. I really think that's a personal subjective thing for me because I come from wine, that it's just, that's how I like a smaller pour just so I can drink more things maybe.
Yeah, and I do think it is a little bit of like whether you kind of think of cider as a wine or a beer a little bit, like, and I do think where a lot of people first encounter ciders, I do think is at breweries, or at beer bars or at, that's an alternative because it kind of started getting a little mainstream with the like, this is a good gluten-free alternative to beer, right? And so I think it got really aligned with beer because of that very early on. And so, of course, beer bars and breweries are going to serve it in a pint glass. Of course they are,
that's what the glassware they have on hand is.
Yeah, absolutely. And whereas like, I definitely like when I'm going to drink a beer, like I don't even think of cider. Like it's just a different thing to me. And so I always think of it as wine and I have it with my cheese plate in a wine glass or with my,
I wonder too, if there's even an avenue, well, at least here, but in general, given the conversation that we were having earlier with regard to the fact that generally cider is a blend of multiple different varietals of apples, and conversely, the whole line of varietal wine glass that Riedel has produced over the years is because it's a specific grape that, while it might be different if it's grown in Barossa as opposed to Northern Rhone, Syrah has some characteristics that are,
I don't see it.
universal. And so a glass that might work for that particular varietal seems like it's something that's worthwhile to make. Whereas if you're going to combine Macintosh and Cabinet, or Macintosh and
Yeah, they're blended. So
Kingston,
mostly.
you're not going to have the opportunity to have a varietal glass
Yeah.
for cider.
Yeah, so I think your standard wine glass is probably our answer.
Yep. I'm
Works.
all in.
Works for us. We already have too many glasses. We don't need to have a whole set of cider glasses on top of our wine glasses.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So many glasses. So many glasses.
Questions, comments? Don't be shy.
Curiosities.
It's so hard for me to stay quiet.
I know this.
I've got to try that one on the grape skins. I haven't had that, so
So good.
that sounded so good when you were talking about it.
That was a small batch run that we did.
Yeah.
And it was a one-off, and it has sold like gangbusters. It actually won a top 10 cider in USA Today this
Oh,
year.
wow.
Yeah.
Congrats.
Yeah, it was really
Nice.
exciting.
Very cool.
Yeah.
So Ed, we should get it out to you sooner than later.
Yep, I'll get there. I may do with another Eden that I had, so
Perfect.
so I could play along. But yeah, that one, that I think of the four that are there, that's the one that I haven't had. So I'll
Yeah.
get some.
Now, what are you drinking?
Yeah, what other Eden one do you have?
This was it's one of the Cellar series. It's the Siren Song.
Oh, you lucky dog.
So yeah,
Sort of French style.
Cellar number 9. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, it's really good. And then we did open a crabapple one and from the Cellar series last year, sort of the fall last year, and it was fantastic. I took a picture. I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head, but it was drinking so well. Yeah,
Awesome.
it was just so good.
Yeah, the one on the grape skins was probably my favorite tonight. So.
Sweet.
Yeah, that was really good.
Yeah, it has beautiful acidity. It has that wine-like acidity that like is just a little adjacent to cider, and it really the mouthfeel is yeah.
Yeah, and the aromatics that I feel like that, how long does the cider spend on the spent Riesling skins?
It was 2 weeks.
Oh, okay,
It
so
was
not insignificant.
It was 2 weeks with almost daily punch downs
And this was post fermentation?
during fermentation.
During fermentation. So
Yeah.
you're getting more extraction because the alcohol is a solvent and is helping to pull that stuff out.
Oh yeah.
Do you
Did you
ferment
use your
in
standard
open
yeast in
vats, or are they closed with like a airlock like here?
Yeah. So they'll have an airlock.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. We have mostly variable capacity tanks.
And then how does the punch down work? Is that mechanical inside the tank, or
No, we just take the lid off and take a
long paddle? Yeah.
Like a lamp post.
It's got a little X on it. Yeah.
And there's no boil, right? It's not like beer, right? You just ferment the juice as is.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's it. Yeah.
I'm realizing I missed a question from Jill earlier about collaborations. If you guys have done collaborations with other brands or other, I know you definitely collaborate with like Vermont growers and Vermont kind of brands a lot, but I'd love to hear about.
And Shelburne Vineyards.
Yeah,
Sure.
I'd love to hear about
Well, I guess
collaborations,
That's
but
more than a collaboration.
also, yeah, I'd love to hear about like what the future of Eden Ciders is looking like especially with these, Shelburne Vineyards and all of these changes. And so what are you excited about for kind of the future of Eden as we kind of talk about what collaborations you've done in the past?
Yeah. The answer is yes. I think collaborations are so important for the success of any producer. I think that existing in your own echo chamber is so dangerous. And there's so many different techniques and approaches and perspectives out there that collaborations are necessary. So excellent question. We've done some notable collaborations with Tilted Shed in Sonoma. We love Ellen, she's amazing. We do a recurring collaboration with Ancho Cider down out of Virginia, and that one is really close to our hearts. That comes out every March, and it's sort of we share juice, so we'll ship juice back and forth to each other. So they'll make one cider that's called Nevertheless, and we make one cider that's called We Persist. So it's Nevertheless, We Persist, and it's for Women's Month. Yeah.
Nevertheless, you persisted.
Yeah.
Yep.
Persist.
Yep. So that's a notable one that's recurring. So I love that one. And then I have a really exciting project that's coming out in May with a small specialty grocery store in Philadelphia area. DeBruno Brothers is what it's called, if anyone's from that area. But we are doing a co-ferment, which leads me to my next point. That's what I'm excited about. Apples and grapes fermented
Really
together,
cool.
apples and plums, apples and peaches, grapes and apples and quince, why not? Growing fermenting what grows in abundance where we are is really the future. I mean, look around, global, whatever. I don't want to get political, but what's going to grow where is tenuous at best. So attaching ourselves to one style or being very dogmatic about what we're going to grow and what we're going to press is only going to lead us to failure, because we are completely at the whim of Mother Nature. It's an agricultural product, and we're in a tough growing region. So this year, for instance, we had a very devastating late season frost in May, and many producers had 100% crop loss. So like, I'm just going to leave that there for a second. 100% crop loss. That does not happen. Like, there's tough years, but this is serious. So we're going to need to be community where there's a lot of, I have apples because I'm a little further north. So my trees weren't as vulnerable. They hadn't gone so far into, ripening, into bud break, we call it. So those apples were able to grow and ripen. Our vineyard partners had about 60% crop loss from their grapes from the frost. So just to achieve the volume that they really need, we're going to be doing a lot of apple grape co-ferments. And I had started this whole tangent with this project that we're doing with a specialty grocery store, which is a cider pet nat that is fermented with a little bit of white wine and on red grape skins. So it's kind of like making soup, but I think
of this.
That's the kind of soup I eat.
So I think that something that's super exciting for me is that often when those things are co-fermented, when they're all in the tank together, they're very often greater than the sum of their parts, and it's almost a whole new frontier of fermented beverages that is like the limit does not exist of that algorithm of apple varieties and grape varieties and whatever else is growing. Rose hips, why not? So I think that's sort of the future. If you ask me, I hope.
Riley, with that kind of concept, co-fermenting, different versions of the same fruit, i.e., Grenache and Syrah and Mourvedre, versus co-fermenting fruits of completely different, families, co-fermenting pineapple with plum and apple. What is that? How does that impact the yeast selection, the fermentation time, the fermentation temperature? Like I'm guessing
in general.
That's the frontier that we're looking at. But do you have any kind of insight as to like the restrictions or the challenges of co-fermentation when it's different fruit that you're fermenting together?
Yeah, so obviously the ripening time is a consideration. So you don't necessarily want to throw a fermenting fruit in with an already finished wine. You just don't really know what another fermentation is going to do. So that's definitely a consideration. But it's also the concept of what grows together goes together. Apple harvest and grape harvest is the same time. So there's that, but there's also, as we sort of navigate this uncertain frontier, it's a bit of an insurance policy. If you can ferment some plums and start fermenting some plums in May, you have this kind of cool, like, reserve of something to play with and sort of experiment with in the fall when other things are being harvested. Or say you have a tough fermentation on a cider, but you're able to have some, what ripens then, like raspberry or something that could sort of help a fermentation along if you're in a stuck fermentation.
Introduce a little more sugar and jumpstart it.
Yeah. Would I do it? Probably not, because I would want to sell it and make sure it's good. But scientifically, yes, you could do that.
Yeah. Cool.
Curious. That's
such fun stuff.
Delightful.
Yeah. The world of cider and craft alcohol in general is really just
it keeps growing, and as people stop being so concerned about their categories, the growth is only going to be
and
strong.
Soon the government might catch up.
Yeah, that is
for labeling regulations. It's a bit of a hellscape right now, but
yeah, how to label it, what you name it,
yeah.
It's a wild west right now, though.
Yeah.
There's a lot of sparkling fruit wines out there, that's for sure.
There are a lot of sparkling fruit wines.
We met a winemaker here in Arizona recently.
Oh, yeah. Omphalos Winery is the name of his.
Omphalos, which is a Greek term that basically indicates the center of all things.
Oh, cool.
Center of the universe. And he made an award-winning tomato wine a few years ago.
Award-winning tomato wine. Yeah.
It was the best in the fruit wine category.
Yeah.
It was tomato one.
Yeah. We were like, what? We were at a private dinner party with him and we were like, what did that taste like? Like, what are you talking about? Like, we were just like,
and even
make it again.
And even he admitted, he's like, I don't know if it was good, but it was exceptional because of what it was made from. And I mean, I've always thought that, of all the fruit out there, tomatoes are pretty high up there on the things that I would think are important for being able to make a wine out of it, because they have so much more acidity than so many other fruits out there. And that's so important when you're trying to make something that has cohesive structure and balance.
But the other fruit wine he made that his wife, who's his partner, said was her favorite that they've ever made was a spiced orange wine. And I was like, a spiced orange wine? Like, that does kind of sound interesting. Yeah, it's fascinating.
Like the citrus orange, not like a skin contact one.
Yes. Yeah.
They also made one from what's the bush?
Oh, it's a bush I didn't even know the name of.
The bush that has a bunch of little red berries on it.
It's here in Arizona.
Aronia?
The little red berries and I can't think of.
Are they aronia berries?
No.
Oak berries?
Bob, Kristen.
Little red berry.
Unmute yourself. Tell me what the little red berry plant is that
Arizona.
is toxic.
Pyracanthum.
Pyracantha wine.
I'm like, what?
Wow.
It's crazy. And he's like, it's only toxic in high volume. You'll never drink that much of it.
Well, don't distill it.
Wait, Riley, before we let you go, you said at the beginning when you were introducing yourself that your background, you come from the world of natural wine.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about what's going on in the world of natural wine, if you're still connected there at all and have thoughts about that. Because I love natural wine. Evan is a little more discerning about natural wine.
Okay.
I really love orange wines. The funkier, the better. Like, so, you know, like I just help people understand what natural wine even is just before we kind of close out here because SipScout members, I would love to do a natural wine kit in the future. So
have more natural wine in our world.
yes.
Yeah, natural wine is another one of these pesky phrases that there is not one necessarily agreed upon definition, but there is a bit of an umbrella that a few philosophical winemaking methodology that is basically non-intervention along the process of winemaking. So it really starts with the soil, but it starts in the vineyard broadly. So grapes that are grown without pesticide sprays, usually grown at least sustainably or practicing organic, even if they're not certified organic. So fruit that is grown without chemical sprays. And then in the cellar, once those grapes are picked and pressed, there is no filtration on the wines. Usually native yeast fermented, so ambient yeasts and yeasts that occur on the grapes. Like I said, no filtration or fining, and no added sulfur at bottling. So only the naturally occurring sulfites. So it's the way that wine was made forever before, you know, the industrial revolution, when we had all of these innovations. And
I would add, Riley, perhaps minimal to no irrigation.
yes, dry
Dry
farms.
farming is very
Yes,
common
thank you.
in that world too. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. And some of the criticism of natural wine is that
People are not clean and sterile.
well, and so people say, oh, it's just a natural wine as like an excuse for bad wine.
Why it tastes like
Sometimes.
that. Yeah.
They're like, oh, it's just because it's natural, but really it's like because they don't know what
this
they
is
don't know what they're
flawed
doing
and
and they're
faulted because you didn't clean the thing that you made it in.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
I'm more than a little bit resistant.
You've been burned.
yeah.
You've
But
been
we have a great friend here in the Sedona area who has a natural wine shop actually, and all he has is natural wine. And so he knows that Evan's been burned, and so he's constantly bringing natural wines. And he's like, no, this is a clean one. This is one that you're going to be excited about. And so you've had quite a few examples that you've enjoyed.
It can be done.
Yeah.
And the idea of a flaw being a virtue is maybe just a little bit of a dichotomy that I can't really get on board with sometimes.
Yeah. I think that there's also an aspect, I'm sorry. I think there's also an aspect to that culture of the story of the person and the land where it comes from. So there's a lot more to the drinking experience than what it just tastes like. But I'm with you, Evan, that like it should first taste good.
First, it should taste good.
I would like it to first taste good, but I see value. I see value even in you know, maybe experiencing a slightly flawed wine.
Yeah, for sure.
And sometimes, like, I don't have a particularly keen perception of Brettanomyces, for example.
Sure.
And I recognize that I enjoy it in some beer, and so that's fine in some wine, in especially like in Pinot, a slight bit of that.
Yeah,
I'm
a
not
Chianti.
turning my nose up at it.
Yeah.
But when it just tastes like nail polish remover,
No.
you don't get to just like shove it off and be like, this is a natural nail polish remover.
Yeah. Not what I want to drink. That's the thing. But it is a very exciting category that's starting to pick up some steam here in the States. So if you see natural wine shops or natural wine, like go talk to someone, try and have them steer you to, I feel like if you say, I like the cleaner kind of natural wines, that usually get you in a good starting point.
Yeah.
Because some of them can get very funky, and sometimes that funkiness is a flaw, and sometimes that funkiness is really fun. But the funky ones are a little riskier, probably.
It can be polarizing for sure. Yeah.
Riley, thank you so much for joining us tonight. This was so amazing. And Eden Ciders
great.
never disappoints. Like you guys, everything I've ever had of yours, I'm thrilled with.
Yeah, these were all delightful.
Yeah.
Thank
and
you.
everyone here, the promo codes are in the chat. Go stock up on some Eden cider and other great craft ciders at Press Then Press. And follow along Eden Ciders on Instagram and keep an eye on what they're doing. And if you guys have a tasting room up in Vermont, people can come visit. Yeah, so if you're in Vermont, go check them out and go meet them in person and try their stuff and visit.
The nearby town of Burlington is a delight and a very worthwhile place to spend a week and go, traverse out to Eden.
Yeah, for sure.
Lots to do and see. Yeah.
Yes.
Everyone, cheers. Happy Thursday. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cider's on, Riley.
Thank you, Riley.
Bill, Ed, I'll
Thanks
tell
so
Eleanor you
much.
say hi.
Thank you. Yes.
Please do.
Regards.
Yeah, and Ed as well. Yeah.
Ed, good to see you.
Everyone,
Bob,
good to see you.
Kristen,
Thank you for
Steph.
joining us.
Thank you for having me. Take
Thank
care.
you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Thank
Bye
you.
now.
Bye-bye.